Hello everyone, today we're going to be theory crafting, deck building, RAKDOS ANVIL for the future standard set. So to prep for that, we're going to be taking a look at a bunch of new cards, plus all the cards that are going to be legal in the standard. So let's hop on over. Oh, actually, before we hop on over, let's actually put the anvil into the deck. And basically the deck I want to build is kind of like a low to the ground deck that ends on 3 mana permanents and let you kind of whittle your opponent's life total down and gain some card advantage through only called anvil and some other stuff that are going to be in the deck. So let's see if we can find some new cards for the deck to make the deck a little bit better. So starting off, I already see a new card that we're going to have in the deck is Cut Down. So I do think Cut Down is going to be the card that we're going to see a lot in Standard. I don't see this card actually being played in Historic or Explorer, and that is because cards like Ledger Shredder exist. Cut Down also doesn't deal with something like a Graveyard Trespasser, which is very, very prominent in the Explorer format, just because RAKDOS mid-range happens to be like, I don't know, like more than 75% of the matchups that you're going to face. So Trespasser happens to be 6 total power and toughness together, so Cut Down doesn't answer that. So Fatal Push is still going to be the go-to card in Explorer and Historic. And same with Historic, you're going to see like things like Core Spirit Dancer that can't be answered with Cut Down, but it can with Fatal Push. So in a format where Fatal Push is legal, I don't think Cut Down will see much play. But in the Standard, you have what? You have any 1-mana creatures, right? And then 2-mana creatures, you're going to see something like Dahlia, for instance. Even on turn 3, Brooded Cathar gets answered by Cut Down. And since we don't also have Lunar Aspirant anymore, their power and toughness don't get snowballed like they did before. So I think we'll see Cut Down a lot in Standard. So for that reason, there's no reason not to add for Cut Downs in my opinion. Although, the 1-drop removal spell is actually competing with Voltage Surge in this particular deck, just because RAKDOS Anvil has so many artifact generations with things like Voldaren Epicure, only called Anvil, right? You also have the Blood Tithe Harvester to generate the blood tokens. All the blood tokens are artifacts, so Voltage Surge actually is kind of competing with that. I'm actually on the boat saying that Voltage Surge is a lot better than the Cut Down. So we'll actually have both of them in the deck for now. And obviously, I just talked about Voldaren Epicure, so let's add Voldaren Epicure. And I also talked about Blood Tithe Harvester. And all of a sudden, the deck is already 20 cards deep in. But looking at the new cards, I do think Cold Conscript is a pretty stellar card for an uncommon. But just because it doesn't really synergize with the deck, not creating artifacts and such, I don't think the card really fits into the deck. Ooh, what do we got here? Evolved Sleeper. So 1 mana, 1/1 human. Spend 1 mana, it becomes a 2/2 cleric. If you spend 2 mana and it's a cleric, it becomes a Death Touch Phyrexian human cleric with a 3/3 toughness. Okay, I mean, the card is kind of cute. Probably not for this deck. So that's all the 1-mana black cards that are new to the set. So let's take a look at all the cards that are available for Future Standard. Dockside Chef, I am actually a fan of Dockside Chef, but I don't think we're going to be adding it. And that's because we're actually going to add a card called Braids into the deck. And we'll talk more about the card later. But great card. I used to play it in the RAKDOS Anvil, but I think we don't need to anymore. As for Duress, that's a discard card. So Duress is actually a card that you should be considering depending on the meta, right? Depending on the meta. And that's because of a card called Farewell. It's a 6-mana card that basically obliterates the battlefield and everything. It just exiles everything. So say goodbye to all your anvils, right? If decks that are too reliant on Farewell happen to become more and more popular, and since we are kind of reliant on things like Anvil and Mihawk Massacre to deal damage, then Duress actually does become a little bit better. It is kind of like a sideboard card, so depending on the meta, right? Depending on the meta. So Eaten Alive is also very interesting. Anvil being able to create a bunch of tokens. So you can sacrifice that creature that you make, and then you can exile target creature or planeswalker. I'm not too sure about this card yet. If there's too many cards that can't be answered with Voltage Surge and Cut Down appear in the meta, then this is something that you should consider. March of the Wretched Sorrow, that's a little bit too expensive in our deck. So we've taken a look at all the black cards, so let's move on to the red cards. Right off the bat, Experimental Synthesizer. So I'm kind of iffy on this card. So for this card to be really good in the deck, your deck has to be so low to the ground. Like for example, in Historic, a Loras deck would want to play this card. If your deck has too many 3-drops and higher, then this becomes a lot worse, because what happens is if you play this card, you don't have enough mana to cast your 3-drops or 4-drops, so you just basically lose the card that's going to be available to you with this card. But it does have a lot of synergy in the deck, because you can sacrifice the Experimental Synthesizer with Oni Cult Anvil. You can also sacrifice this card with Voltage Surge. I'll put it into the deck for now, but we might have to remove some of these cards later. As for everything else, I don't see anything that can really synergize with the deck, right? Strangle is just the worst. Voltage Surge in our deck. Voldaren Epicure, we already added it. We also see Voltage Surge here. We already added the card, and we're moving on to 2-drops. So far, the deck looks something like this. We have 4 1-drops with 2 2-drops. Looking pretty good. Oh yeah, I forgot to add Mihawk Massacre. So there it is, there it is. So moving on to the 2-drops from the new set, I don't see anything that is... Shadowrite Priest, 2-mana 2/2, other clerics you control get +1/+1. You can sacrifice a creature, search your library for a black creature card, put it onto battlefield, and shuffle. A lot of conditions to make this happen. Definitely not for our deck though. Stronghold Arena, 2-mana enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 3 life for each time it was kicked. Whenever one or more creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may reveal top card of your library and put it onto the hand. If you do, you lose life equal to its mana value. That's a lot of conditions. Yeah, I don't know. It's a 2-mana do nothing, and it requires you to have creatures, and it has to connect to the face. That's a no-go. Raven Man, 2-mana 2/1. At the beginning of each end step, if a player discarded this turn, create a 1/1 black bird creature token with flying, and this creature can't block. Okay, so the fact that it makes a 1/1 bird token that cannot block, this card probably will never see play. Obviously, this does combo well with Liliana, right? You play the Raven Man on turn 2, and then you Liliana plus to get rid of a card from your opponent's hand, and then it makes a 1/1 token. But if opponent has any creatures on the board, they can just attack your Liliana, then the Raven Man has to block himself to protect Liliana. That doesn't seem very good, right? So for that reason, I don't think this card will ever see play. But yeah, from the new set, there doesn't seem to be any new cards that we can play from black. So let's take a look at red. Looking at red, yeah, everything looks kind of meh. Everything looks kind of meh. Okay, so now let's take a look at the rest of the cards from 2-mana cards. And right off the bat, Mihawk Massacre, we did just add Mihawk Massacre, but I guess I can talk a little bit more now. But the reason why we're playing Mihawk Massacre, everybody probably knows why the Mihawk Massacre is broken. And especially in this deck, just because you're making a lot of 1/1s. But basically, the Mihawk Massacre makes it so that your opponent can't really attack you anymore, just because unless they also play a Mihawk Massacre, because you're gonna have a bunch of 1/1s from the Anvil. And basically, having Anvil and Mihawk Massacre, you just form the win condition for your deck. Because every time you sacrifice your artifact creature token, you're going to be dealing 2 damage, one from Anvil and then 1 from Mihawk Massacre. But right now, I don't know how many Mihawk Massacres to play yet. Since we are kind of a low to the ground deck, we're not going to have that many lands in the deck in the first place. So Mihawk Massacre might not be like the greatest thing to have multiples of in your hand, especially considering that this is a legendary. So right now we have 4 copies on the deck, but when we're actually done, we might have to cut some cards from the main deck. There's the Blood Tide Harvester. We added that earlier. This is a 2-mana 3/2 that creates a blood token, which is an artifact, which goes well with Anvil, since you can sacrifice the blood token it creates, and then you can create a 1/1 from the Anvil. Or you can just hoard the blood tokens and use the Blood Tide Harvester as a removal spell. That also works too. But I'm not seeing a new card to add to the deck. Infernal Grasp is a card that we could play if there's too many like flyers that cannot be answered with either Voltage Surge or Cut Down. But I suspect that we won't really need Infernal Grasp. Considering that angels, a lot of the good angels, especially the Righteous Valkyrie, has rotated out, so you're not going to be really seeing like flyers that can't be blocked with your creatures. So that's probably a no for the deck. But it looks like there's not much going on in the 2-drop slot. Virus Beetle is actually pretty interesting. This is a 2-mana 1/1 artifact that lets your opponent discard a card when it comes to battlefield, but the fact that this is an artifact creature means that you can trigger your Voltage Surge, and you can also trigger your Anvil when Virus Beetle dies. So that's pretty nice. So I'm actually going to add the Virus Beetle into the maybe board in case we actually need more cards for the deck. Okay, so now we're going to be looking at red cards at 3-mana slot. I'm gonna go over it a little bit more quicker than before. Everything seems kind of mad to me. Oh, Fable of the Mirror Breaker. Yes, we do kind of need that, huh? Let's add that. Obviously, the card is kind of absurd, but what's really good about Fable of the Mirror Breaker in our deck is because it can copy Blood Tide Harvester, basically generating a removal spell every single turn. Or you can copy Voldaren Epicure to constantly generate a blood token as well. I just think the card is really good. Florian is also a very, very nice card for the deck because the Anvil deals 1 damage instead of making your opponent lose life, meaning that it does actually trigger the Florian without having to declare an attack at all. So that is pretty nice for the deck. And considering it has First Strike, it's also very nice as well. I'm going to add this into the maybe board. Okay, this is a new card, Lagomo's Hand of Hatred. At the beginning of combat on your turn, create a 2/1 red elemental creature token with Trample Haze, sacrifice it at the beginning of your next end step. Search your library for a card, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Activate only if 5 or more creatures died this turn. So how likely is it for the deck to trigger so that 5 creatures have died this turn? So Anvil can sacrifice only 1 card at a time, and then if you do have a Voltage Surge in your hand, you can also sacrifice 1 more. Unless you like Mihog Massacre for 1, killing your own creatures, I just don't see this card ever being played. How do you get 5 creatures to die? Yeah, that's probably gonna be a no. Here's Omnixilus, 3-mana Planeswalker that lets you discard a card, and soon to be replaced Planeswalker. But I'm not going to be putting it into the deck just because we got a new Planeswalker. I'll talk about Liliana a little bit later. Okay, we're finally in black. The first card that I want to talk about is Braids. This is a 3-mana 3/3 legendary creature. At the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice an artifact, creature, enchantment, land, or Planeswalker. If you do, each opponent may sacrifice a permanent that shares a card type with it. For each opponent who doesn't, that player loses 2 life, and you draw a card. So the reason why I think this card is very synergetic in the deck is because of Oni Cult Anvil. Oni Cult Anvil generates a creature that's an artifact and a creature at the same time. So at the beginning of your end step, you can sacrifice an artifact or a creature. And if you do have Oni Cult Anvil on the battlefield, and Oni Cult Anvil says that whenever 1 or more artifact that you control leaves the battlefield during your turn, meaning that Braids can sacrifice one of your artifact tokens, and Oni Cult Anvil will generate an additional creature from the artifact leaving the battlefield, and then Braids will trigger, and opponent has to decide whether or not they want to give me a card and lose 2 life, or they want to sacrifice a creature. And you didn't even lose anything, because the Oni Cult Anvil just pooped out another creature after you sacrificing that artifact token. So that's really nice touch that Braids actually doesn't say a non-token artifact creature. So I do think Braids is a very, very cool card for the deck. So we're gonna be adding at least 3 or 4. I don't know. Let's just put 4 for now. Finally, we get the card that everybody is really excited about, Liliana the Veil. 3 mana Planeswalker, +1, each player discards a card, and -2, target player sacrifices a creature, and -6, separate all permanents target player controls into 2 piles. That player sacrifices all permanents in the pile of their choice. But what makes this really strong is the fact that the discard part is not conditional. Now, I am not 100% sure whether or not this actually does belong in the deck, because I do think this kind of card is a little bit more mid-range card. This actually has the same problem with Nixilis, right? If opponent curves out turn 1 creature, turn 2 creature, then you can't play Liliana of the Veil unless you remove their creature every single turn. But if you go first and opponent just plays 1 creature on turn 2, then you get to have Liliana of the Veil, comes down, and then you can sacrifice a creature, and you're kind of good to go. But at the same time, right, what happens then if you don't have a way to protect after you -2 the following turn? And the +1, discarding a card, is each player discards a card. So if your deck has some synergy to go along with the discarding a card, does become a lot better. But I don't know if Liliana the Veil is going to be the card for the deck. I think it's a lot better when the deck is a lot more mid-rangey with a lot more removal spells and board wipes and such. So we'll have to see about Liliana the Veil. Even if you don't have one in the deck, I don't think it's going to be really a deal breaker. So I'm not going to do the lands. So we're just going to add 22 swamps. We're just going to add 11 swamps and 11 mountains. Wow, we actually do have to add 2 more cards into the deck. And looking at our curve, I do kind of like the curve actually. So our Braids actually has enchantment sacrifice, artifact sacrifices, and a creature sacrifice. That pretty much covers everything except Planeswalker. And we have 8 types of removal spells in our deck. So what are we missing? So to go through our deck, we have experimental synthesizers and some blood tokens and Fable of the Mirror Breakers at the moment. I do believe Deadly Dispute actually rotated out. Deadly Dispute. So Deadly Dispute is indeed gone from the deck. Do we add more removal spells? I mean, adding more removal spells isn't the worst, right? Actually, thinking about it, maybe think we should just play 24 lands because we don't have Deadly Dispute. I can definitely see this deck working as a 22 land deck if we had Deadly Dispute. Being able to make a treasure is pretty powerful, but because we have Fable of the Mirror Breaker, I think having more lands isn't too bad because we can just ditch the lands, right? So instead of like adding like random cards, I think just going up to 24 lands is probably for the best. So currently our deck looks something like this. Maybe instead of 1 Meathook Massacre and 1 Braids, we can swap that around with Florian. How are you feeling about that? Or it could even be like Virus Beetle too. But I kind of like the idea of having a Florian on deck. Since Braids is a legendary creature, we'll have 1 less Braids and 1 less Meathook Massacre. There's also Unlucky Witness, but we have no way of sacrificing the Unlucky Witness. When it dies, you can exile the top 2 cards, and then until your next end step, you may play one of those cards. So it's not a bad card to actually like go through your deck, but the problem is the fact that we don't have a Deadly Dispute. Let me see if there's anything that we can use it to like sacrifice a creature. So looking at it, Oni Cold Anvil only lets you sacrifice an artifact. Fatal Grudge lets you sacrifice a non-land permanent. Each opponent chooses a permanent they control that shares a type with that sacrifice permanent. I don't think this card is very good, but that's the thing, because if it was like targeted, then I'm like, okay, that's pretty good. But because it's your opponent gets to choose, it's very limiting. Right? It's cute, for sure, but yeah, there's really like just no sacrifices, man. Okay, well, yeah, you can't play that card. But that's it for the deck. I personally think the Braids has a lot of potential. And I can definitely see adding Liliana into the deck, but considering you have to also discard a card, I think the deck does have to have some sort of graveyard synergy to make the card a lot better. And if you constantly discard one of your cards, Fable of the Mirror Breaker also becomes a lot worse since you can't actually utilize a second chapter as well. So we'll have to see. But that's gonna be it for the deck building for RAKDOS Anvil. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. And if you did, leave a like, comment below. This is my second time doing this kind of video. Tell me if you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys all later. Bye-bye.